Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today, we have a special guest who's going to speak to the two E's, or the gifted, also known as the twice exceptional, who are often misunderstood. Mark Talaga will present to us on how crucial it is to counsel these individuals who are neurodivergent but are often overlooked. So, Mark, I just want you to thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. So go ahead.
No. So I'm just curious, in terms of how this all started for you, going from a video game professional to a counselor and gifted and talented individuals who are, trying to figure out the world as complex as it is.
Yeah, very strange path indeed. Bit of a left turn in my life, but that's okay. Helps me relate to a lot of the kids and adults that I work with. But basically, yeah, I was never formally diagnosed gifted, and I don't even really believe in that anyways. But it's more like I grew up where school was a very easy thing for me and didn't study, didn't take notes, anything like that. I just was able to make it along. College was definitely tricky when all of a sudden my executive function challenges and processing issues and all the things that I had underneath started to rear their ugly head, but I made it through. And I was kind of one of those people that's like, well, if I can find something that I love doing and I'm very interested in, like video games, and I find that dream job, then that'll solve all my issues. And so I was able to do that. And I worked in the industry for about 4 years, and eventually I got fired because I couldn't keep up with the management of organizing and prioritizing and sequencing and all these executive function issues. And so it left me in kind of this what am I doing with my life kind of a phase. And I was at a point where I was able to say, I really want to help people. And that's as far as I could really get as far as my awareness. And so I went and got my master's in counseling psychology. But because I didn't have a background in psych, it was very hard for me to find a clinical practicum or internship until I met Andy Mahoney. And I kind of cold called, reached out to him. And he is the founder of the Center for Identity Potential, where I am the owner now. And he really created the field of counseling to the gifted, like how you tailor an approach that works with this population. And the more I did the work, the more I realized, whoa, that is everything that I've been up against in my life, and fell in love with the work. And luckily, I've been able to integrate my video game passion before with a lot of the kids I work with, because they're all, gamers too. And so it all came full circle, but it was a very weird, windy path that I walked down to get here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And yeah, Andy Mahoney is someone who's well known in that field, right?
Oh,
Andy?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
big time. Yeah, he's,
Yeah.
yeah, big player.
Yeah, and now you're the owner of that. So, yeah, and I'd love to dig a little deeper into the center that you have. But before doing that, I just wanted to ask you, because as a speech and language pathologist, working with teens and tweens, that has been my expertise for countless years. A lot of times I found that in working with individuals with autism or neurodivergent ADHD, whatever you may, place in that category, sometimes it co-occurs with individuals who are also gifted and talented. Gifted and talented individuals may have autism as well. And I find it even harder sometimes to grapple with, okay, so what are they really experiencing? Or separately from that, somebody may think somebody is autistic, but they really are 2E, right? So there are many, as with so many other categories, and unfortunately, we sometimes place people into categories and we don't think outside that box. But what have you found to be helpful in terms of what distinguishes a two-ear or a gifted and talented individual,
Right.
especially in their teens and tweens?
Yeah, so it's a tricky thing because, labels can be very helpful and labels can tend to flatten a person
Right.
into two dimensions, and we don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
So I kind of go back to the basis of like, what is giftedness in our, in how we deal with it at our center. And for us, giftedness is really just some level of the human development in an extreme where it is just outside of the norm. It is overdeveloped in a sense. But typically, what we find is when you have that development that is in some level of an extreme, it doesn't always have to be intelligence or academic prowess, but it could be an extreme in fine or gross motor skills or an artistic gift or, a sense of moral justice, of right and wrong, emotional sensitivities in some level of an extreme. But when you have things that are way ahead in certain areas, you also have other areas of a person's development more in the norm or even delayed. And those gaps in a person's profile, we call it asynchronous development. And when we work with any client, we're really trying to understand their asynchronous development. Where are they way ahead? Where are they middling? And where are they maybe delayed? And those gaps are really where a lot of the challenge comes from in helping them get whatever it is they're after. So for us, it's less about the label and more about, can we do really, really good evaluation and assessment on this person's profile and how they engage with the world?
Yeah, and the way you explain that, it makes it easier for me to just even reflect on individuals I've worked with. And even as they come across my way in terms of, okay, they're more advanced. That's the key here. They're more advanced, and it could be one area, two areas, but because of that, the development is so fast that their peers are technically behind them. And then this causes, especially in the teen and tween years, some conflict or a lot of conflict in some cases. And one of the things I've observed, and maybe you could speak to more in terms of counseling on this, is that a lot of these 2 years I find like they start shutting down.
Mhm.
So once I started learning more about TUI, which was not in the beginning of my career, no graduate school really teaches you much about it,
No,
but then you
they
start
don't.
observing it, no. And then I started noticing that, oh wow, like they have so much to share, they have so much knowledge, and especially in specific areas, but they're not really sharing it, and they're starting to really not do well in school, sometimes failing out of school, even though they are gifted and talented. They're not really wanting to socialize anymore by high school, or they're isolating. Can you explain how that happens, that process, and how you are able to counsel them and just bring them back to being grounded?
Yeah. And so, very common. What you're describing is what a lot of people experience for their own children or for even for themselves. And it can be very painful. It can be very confusing and create, an identity panic about, wait a minute, I thought I was smart and capable and talented. And now all of a sudden I can't seem to do, anything. And am I not really smart? It puts people in a real panic. Because every individual is different, it's tricky. But I'll give you kind of a common case that would happen
Sure.
in. So let's say you have a child who has pretty severe auditory processing or language processing. They can't seem to integrate language in a way where they'll hear what you're saying, but they can't make sense of it, or they'll get the gist of it, but they fill in the blanks with, their own,
Sure.
smarts and what they think you're saying. Or you have the flip side, you have a child who has a lot of thoughts and feelings and experiences, but doesn't know how to organize that into language to get it out of them.
Hmm.
And so, if you have a kid like that, certain classes, especially language heavy classes like, English, language
Right.
arts, history,
Hmm.
where there's a lot of lecture, that can be a very difficult place for a child, especially if there's not a high level of interest in it. If they have interest, all of a sudden that might not be so much of a problem. But now all of a sudden, are struggling to stay connected to the work. They kind of can't make sense of it. It passes them by. Let's say we'll throw on top they have executive function difficulties.
Yeah.
And so they're not able to initiate on work, or they can't sustain the work. Maybe they have pockets where they're doing well and then other times they don't. And all of that compounds together, and they just start to feel really disconnected from school. It's too much demand on them, even though they're very smart. And so they might say things like, well, I'm bored in school. Well, boredom can be a couple of things. Boredom could be, yes, it's too easy and you could do it in your sleep. But boredom can also come when it's so much demand on you that you can't stay connected with it in an organized way. You don't know how to make sense of the information. And so come homework time, you're feeling lost. And a lot of really smart kids will just teach themselves in the moment, and that's how they'll get through. But there's always an enormous cost to a child having to try to manage that while seemingly still getting decent grades or not really being a problem. And when you break it down into where these vulnerabilities are in their development, where they're actually struggling and where they've been overcompensating for a long time, a lot of this stuff starts to make sense. Yes, you're very intelligent and super smart and you have high levels of reasoning. But when it comes to processing information around topics you don't really care about or aren't interested in, you tank. And that's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's because there's an actual neurological developmental function that's not engaged in the way versus over here where you do really well. And so when you start to uncover what that's really about for kids, you can start to help work with schools and families to create understanding and awareness to help it all make sense again. So they're not feeling so hopeless and feeling like they're just failing.
Yeah, that's so important, and it's so interesting how you said that many oftentimes they are struggling in their non-preferred interest, right? And an
Right.
interest it's just not on their radar. They don't like it. They're not interested in. I feel like that overlaps with so many other things too, where sometimes also with ADHD, if it's a non-preferred interest, right? It's so hard, but it seems like they excel in the things that they really love. So it
Right.
could be giving a skewed picture to those who are working with them because it's like, wait, are they not trying? Are they lazy? Like, what's going on here? But you're mentioning that no, this is actually a neurological situation that forces their brain to shut down, I guess, on some level when it's something that just is not of interest to them. And so,
Right.
yeah,
And so it's like what a phrase that I like to give to parents when working with a kid like this is you have to remember that for them, these kids, the complex is simple and the simple is complex.
right.
So when you're seeing them do complex things, that does not translate to every area of their life. For them to remember to brush their teeth in the morning is a very complicated process where their reasoning of why they don't really need to today or why that's not something engaging. But if you break it down into what you're struggling with this kid is they're struggling to initiate or self-monitor or stay on some level of schedule, and that is a challenge for them. And sometimes parents are like, well, I created a behavioral checklist and they
Mhm.
still didn't work. Well, you might have gone behavioral a little too quickly to where
Yeah.
that kid needs to understand first and foremost what they're really up against, why there is a struggle there at all. And then connecting them to the idea of, they're intellectually smart enough to know that brushing your teeth is a good thing, but emotionally they may be feeling like it's too much. They're already halfway into their day in their head. They're already worried about sixth hour. And so they feel overloaded and overwhelmed. And how do you teach them to be aware of those things, to slow things down, to move one step at a time? And it's a tricky process. And so a lot of our counseling is around having them really understand what the quote unquote problem is around skill and how much support they might need and how much they need to be held accountable to the things they're trying to build in their life. And then you can start to get clever on behavioral interventions and things like that.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you mentioned the behavior checklist because that's just something that doesn't really work. I've observed with any of my students from autism to ADHD to receptive and expressive language disorders, I've never seen a behavior checklist actually work. I've always found that what works usually is what you were describing, which is more working together, speaking together, self monitoring, teaching self monitoring, declarative language. Like everything you're saying,
Yep.
like really speaks to me because I see that it doesn't really work. And now executive functioning has become such a big land of its own, world of its own, with so many people teaching executive functioning. And then it becomes confusing too because it seems like anybody can say they're an executive functioning coach. And
Right.
what does that really mean, right? If you're just going to look at somebody's, let's say, work and see how long it
Yep.
takes them to do it. But it's like you said, much more layered and nuanced. Especially the executive functioning system is also not working well with these students. So
Right.
planning, prioritizing, organizing is a
Yep.
big thing. So when you counsel these families, do you also work on the executive functioning piece? Do you include the parents a lot? Because
Oh, yeah.
parents have really been with the TUIs specifically, they're very on top of things and they're very much interested in developing the skills so much so sometimes that I find that they're almost putting a lot of pressure on these students.
Right. Because it's all about the performance. It's all about the
Right.
result. And
The
we got to
results,
be
exactly.
very careful with that because really the piece that almost everybody misses the emotional intensity is the sensitivity to perceived criticism and to the idea that they're not doing a good job and if they would only just blank then their lives would be better. Everybody gets caught in that, and so
Right.
a lot of times my work is absolutely with the families because everything is systems based anyways. It's rarely
Right.
where it's just that kid in a vacuum that is struggling and everything else is working perfectly. I mean, how many parents that I've worked with that have their own executive function challenges, right? And
Mhm.
are they dealing with that in themselves and just hoping their kid figures it out? You've got to look
Yeah.
at how much support that maybe even the parents need in order to
Yeah.
create a system that's more workable and a better fit. But even, telling a parent, well, you need more help or you need somebody to help take care of that aspect, they might get defensive. They might say, no, we don't have the money. And it's totally understandable. I get that, but you can see immediately there's an emotional reaction, a feeling of, it's got to work this way or it doesn't work at all. And that's where people can get in trouble because they try the same thing over and over and it's not helping. I don't know why the behavioral checklist works, or maybe it did work for like a week and then it stopped working. And then they never went back to reevaluate the process of why that fell off or why they're struggling to keep accountable to it. And the more you dive in and get deeper and deeper, the more you start to realize that people are, can be hurting around this or struggling around this or sad around it. And that
Yes.
part has to be there. And you don't have to be a counselor, but you have to have that relationship, which, I can tell from you that one of the things you probably do very, very well with people is you create a relationship with them. This isn't about how we're going to fix everything and tinker with your kid in the shop and send them back to you all better, but how you connect with that child or connect with that family to say, hey, I see what you're up against. It's really tricky. And we got to slow things down quite a bit for you to really get where you want to go.
Yeah, I think connection is really the first line of defense because without connection, there's no buy-in, and
Yep.
without buy-in, there's no potential for progress. And even with parents, it's interesting that you mentioned this because I had a parent coach on here, a colleague of mine, 2 episodes ago, and she was speaking to the fact that sometimes with parents, it's hard for them to ask for help because
Yeah.
then they view it as maybe they failed at something, or maybe in the society that we're living in, depending on what clique or group you're in, it's still kind of like feeling a feeling of shame, even though we're in 2026, right? And I feel like mental health and neurological health and neurodevelopment is so much more out there, like in a way that's like overly out there, like in a good way, you know? So that's interesting. It's you're dealing, like you said, I think you made a good point with emotions, not just of the children, but of the parents who are feeling like, wait, what did I do wrong? Or what can I do right? Or maybe like, wait, I think I've seen two types of parents. One are the type that, not that it's black and white, but
Right.
that is craving anything that you give them, right? I work, I'm like, their families like this, parents like this, anything you give them, they're just like, just give us whatever you have, give us whatever resources you have. And they really just want anything, just to help the child, and we'll try it. And of course, we'll be honest too, if they've tried something, it didn't work. And then the other kind of parent that's scared to try anything new or scared to try anything that they weren't told before because again, like we know a lot of people, a lot of cooks in the kitchen have maybe worked with this child before, and not all of them necessarily are, experts in it or have an expertise in it. So the parent that's eager, I feel like, is easier to access, obviously. But at the same time, the other family, you said like the parents that are a little bit more hesitant, you get them locked in through just connection, or is it that they see over time that there's progress?
It's a lot of setting expectations right off the get. It's really saying, look, we work in like systemically, like we are working in systems because yes, even a person's culture, if you
Yeah.
grew up in some like kind of rich north,
Hmm.
suburb, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden you're saying, oh, my child needs special help, everybody's gonna be like,
Right.
oh, your
Oh, yeah.
child's a little snowflake. And it's like
Yeah.
that has an effect on you.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to feel supported or find connections or find people that might get it. And that can influence what you're willing to try or if you have shame around certain things, and so it all matters where you came from or how your parents raised you. And so I'm always like, I'm putting everything on the table if you
Mhm.
want to work with us because it's all relevant. It all is data that can help us get a clearer picture of where things might get stuck. So you really do have to come in with a very complex assessment process when working with very complicated kids. And if you try to oversimplify it, it might be nice for the parent in the moment, but when it doesn't work, then the parent's like, well, I guess, it doesn't work and you don't know what you're doing. And it's like, okay. So you really have to set it up very
Yeah.
early for parents that they are going to be involved on some level, or we're going to assess whether their involvement needs to be a part of things. Like I'll work with the kid for a while sometimes. I'll be like, this kid's fine. Like, yeah, they're getting C's and D's, but they're okay. Like they're
Yeah.
happy. They have friends. They have
Right.
activities in life. And it's the parents who are truly struggling with what's
Mhm.
going on with that kid. But I need to get a better sense of what that's about for them because usually underneath that fear that they have for what this means for their kid, there's pain around their own feeling like they're screwing up. And I'm more interested in that at that point and how to help them contextualize what they might need to be doing and what they need to focus on and how they need to engage in order to really make that system work a little bit better. But yeah, and sometimes parents aren't willing and they'll say,
Yes.
no, my favorite line is, I have my own therapist. What are you trying to help me for? And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to be your therapist, but I am trying to use our relationship to say there's more going on here. And are we willing to look at that or not? And sometimes, they say not, and that's okay. And hopefully we find a better fit for 'em somewhere else.
Yeah, and that leads me to a next part of this, and I kind of have a two-part question actually. First of all, you have a podcast yourself,
Yeah.
so let's plug it, right? Hopelessly Gifted.
Yep.
And I find that to be a very interesting title for the podcast because it's hopelessly gifted, which we're hopeful, right? But at the same time, the hopelessly gifted, these students are struggling a lot, right? And can feel hopeless, which is, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds like part of the
It's
reasoning behind.
absolutely part of it. The second part is you are who you are. Like if you're a gifted, neurodivergent,
Mm,
complicated person, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but you're hopelessly so. That's who you are. And you need to
mhm.
start dealing and knowing who you are at a very deep level because only by that process of knowing all the areas of strengths and vulnerabilities and challenges and nuance can you really figure out a plan and an identity that can fit who you are and how you express yourself into the world. So there's that hopeless part. But yeah, it's
Yes,
also like people take giftedness and think, oh, your kid's gifted. Well, I guess they'll just be perfect and everything's going to be
right,
fine. And it is not that case
yeah,
for a lot of people out there. And I don't want to skip over that or deny somebody's
right.
feeling that they can feel hopeless, but there is hope. Yeah.
Yeah, there's hope, and, just embracing it, that's really also the goal. Hopelessly gifted that, ultimately, everybody can embrace it in a very positive way, in a way that they can build up their strengths just like anybody else,
Right.
and really hone in on that in a way that, allows them to succeed. And speaking of that, peers, social, community. So this is where I find it's also difficult for our 2 ears because, like you said, they're so advanced in some ways, and some individuals I've noticed or I've observed rather in their classes may feel like, wait, why do they know more than me? Or they're trying to prove themselves. I'm smart too. Like, why do they think they're smarter than me? And it becomes a whole confusion between the gifted and talented and those that are maybe not, almost like a conflict of like, well, I'm smarter, who's smarter? And sometimes things come across the wrong way too. I've noticed
Mhm.
just from a social standpoint, where some of these gifted and talented students really are not necessarily trying to showboat or show how great they are, but it's just this is a knowledge that they have about the topic. And so they're going to share it. So I find that social piece to be really complex
It
as they get
is.
older. Is there, I know there's no magic pill, but is there something that you can offer in terms of what you do in the counseling with these individuals and their families to help them because social activities are really not easy?
No, for sure. And it becomes a very tricky subject because a lot of the information out there is, well, they got to try and they just got to join groups and
Yeah.
they got to do this thing. And that is true to an
Oh,
extent,
right.
but the challenge to do those things or sustain those things is very difficult. So, we deal with this issue quite a lot because it is so important, but we try to really simplify it down. It's, what does it really take to connect? What does it really take to connect with a person and create and foster a relationship? And it goes back down to some basics. It's do you know how to listen? And I mean, really listen. And a lot of these kids are so fast and so quick that they've relied on their storehouse of knowledge and they want to info dump at you, right? And that's their
Yeah.
way of trying to connect. And so it doesn't always work. Yeah, you find another kid that's just as, into that topic, sure, then you're going to have a bond for life. The reality is it sometimes is a maladaptive way of getting what we all really want as human beings, which is connection. We thrive
Mhm.
with others. That's how we grow. And so we'll do things where we run groups for kids, but it's not a social, like, not necessarily social skills group. It's more like pragmatic language processing. It's like
Yeah.
we are teaching you how to very carefully hear another person and not interpret another person, but hear another person with their
Mm,
words that they chose. And so we have a lot of weird, funny rules in our groups. One is you can't ask questions of the other people. We do this on purpose. One, because questions create a power differential. When
mhm.
you're asking a question of somebody, you're staying up here and like, you need to give me data, and you're almost removing yourself from the interaction. And the second one is, it's teaches you how to rely on just asking a bunch of questions rather than picking up on what you're really picking up on.
Right.
So, when we'll have a kid like share an issue they're going through. And it's not always a problem. It might be something they just want to get better at. I want to get better at
Mhm.
turning my homework in on time. And the next phase after a person shares is that the person has to hear them exactly. I'm talking verbatim. I heard you want to learn how to get your homework on time. And then does that person feel heard and then have a reaction to it? But a lot of times what these kids will do is they'll say, "Well, I hear you want to get better at school." And I'll be like, "That's not what they said. It's interesting that you went there." Now, and then we want to explore why you went there and why you didn't just keep it to where they are. Is it that you're
Interesting.
over relating because that's something that you're picking up on for yourself? And so by the slowing it down to the point where I'm hearing you and then I'm sharing a reaction, and the reaction might be, I relate to that, or the reaction might be, that's interesting to me because it doesn't seem like that would bother you because you don't seem to care about school. But we're trying to really create a relationship focused piece where they're learning what it really takes to connect. And that's where a lot of these kids really struggle. It's not easy for them. It doesn't come naturally as it might to some other kids. And so, but it's always getting back down to the basics rather than trying to say, well, let's try to find you another neurodivergent friend that lives 2 hours away. And that's how we'll solve
Mhm.
your social problems,
Right.
because it's a human issue. It's not, specific to just gifted people. It's a little more challenging and yes, more nuanced, but at the end of the day, we need to learn what it is to connect and how we share of ourselves and learn to hear from others.
And it's interesting because on some level, and everything's a spectrum, but we could all benefit from this kind of group setting, right? Because so many of us, myself included, make assumptions. We hear something and we hear something else. The other person thinks they said something else. And before you know it, you're having conflict, right? So
Right.
I think it's great for everybody. Obviously, on the other side of the spectrum, these individuals are struggling even more immensely because it sounds like they are really having a lot of issues with the language processing piece in terms of, like, for example, just a simple statement such as I want to get better at doing my homework and then jumping to school because that's something that maybe they want to do. So it's kind of like almost like they take things on for themselves that they
Right.
think are relevant for them. So it's a lot of pragmatic language, it sounds like. And that's why
Yes.
I think that's something that can work for anyone in a group, not just pairing them, like you said, with some other neurodivergent person, like, 5 hours away. Yeah.
Right, because and too often parents feel the pressure to solve that issue for them because they see their child feeling lonely or saying they're lonely or saying nobody likes it. And it's heartbreaking. It is such a
Mhm.
difficult thing to hear. And I don't blame a single parent out there who wants to try to solve that for them. But it is about that child is expressing, yes, loneliness. But what loneliness is really about is I don't know how to share who I am and how to experience things. And then you got to slow it down even further. Does that child even have an intention to want to connect to others? That child
Yeah.
that might have one friend and
Right.
it might be like the old neighbor next door or whatever, and they're fine. And they're like, I
Right.
got what I need. And sometimes we project what we think they should be having in their life
That's
rather
very,
than evaluating, like, do you even want to have more friends? But some kids really do. And
yeah.
then you have to deal with what they might need. And it can all start at home. Do parents and children really listen to one another and do they practice that? And a lot of times that's not even there. And so before we go and shove them off to a group, can we learn how to connect, in the moment with one another? And so I do a lot of family work too, where it's really again about how you really hear one another and how, all the dynamics that come out that kind of complicate that.
I feel like my family would benefit from this. If you're
Not a,
listening,
yeah,
guys,
yeah,
if you're
right.
listening, we need this. We need
Let's
Mark at our
let's do
side.
it. Yeah,
Let's
right.
do it. Okay. Anyway, it's true. I just speak truth. It's unmasking social. So
Yeah,
honest to the point here, right?
love it.
But okay, so interesting. So yeah, I think that's great that you start at home and then you build it up, and then they're working with peers in a very organic, authentic way, not just shoving them off to some social group or
Right.
to a sport that they need to play. Basically, I put that in quotes, need to play, because that's where sometimes I run into maybe some challenges where parents in general, I mean, just being you're a parent, you know how it is that
Yeah.
sometimes you want your kids to maybe do things that you like to do, and so maybe you were a really good athlete. So why not, they be a really good athlete? And so sometimes I've noticed and I've observed, and I wonder if you probably observe the same thing and how you handle it, where, especially with these gifted and talented students, they're being thrown into something that maybe the parents really want them to do. And they're spending hours outside of school on, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's rugby, maybe it's piano, and it's not that they don't like it, but they're spending so much of their extra time on it and they don't necessarily feel like they're connecting to it. And they're really good at it because they're gifted and talented in some of those areas, but they don't really enjoy it so much, but the parents still feel like this is a big part of their life and they should continue with it. But then there's no time for anything else because there's that and there's academics. Have you ever run into this problem
Oh, yeah.
before?
Of course, all the time. And, and it's funny because, if I'm working with, like, let's say a high schooler who is, doing activities that, oh, my mom's making me do it, my dad's making me do it, and I don't really like it anymore, there's a tendency to want to kind of be like, I gotta be careful how I say this, like, oh, poor you, and let's try to solve this. And it's more like, have you ever said that to your mom and dad? Have you ever gone through that? And it might be like, no, I'm too scared, or they're just going to yell at me, or I tried, but they did it in a way that wasn't maybe honest enough about what it really means for them. And so it can be a very challenging thing. But I want to teach the child how to say, I don't have any connection to this. It's not what I want. But, again, parents will be like, well, it's important to be a part of a team and it's important to build those skills. And that's true. But again, are we really working through, is this the way to do it? Are there other options? And again, evaluating, is that child not wanting to do it because they literally don't have a passion and it has no meaning for them? Or is it because they've hit a level of challenge in the work that they don't know how to get through and their ego's feeling a little bit bruised? And so it's a lot of things you have to talk out and
Mm.
look for before you make a decision on how you want to proceed. And the challenge is, do we really know why this kid is really struggling? And then you have the flip side, right? A kid who has said, I am good at engineering. Math makes sense to me. I want to go be an engineer. And lo and behold, this kid is a phenomenal artist and they draw and they paint and they express themselves through it. But they've locked themselves in that the only career choice is supposed to be engineering
Yeah.
because it's safe, you get good money,
Mhm.
there's a lot of good
And they're
reasons,
good at it.
and
And
they're
they're really
good
good.
at it, right? And
Yeah.
remember, I was good at video games. That
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily translate to me having a fulfilled, purpose-driven life because I had more to me that I did not consciously have awareness about. And I can go into my, if we're going to really unmask,
Yeah.
I grew up
Please unmask
as,
it all.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I grew up as the youngest in my family of
Me
three.
too.
And my older sister, had some pretty severe psychiatric issues. She was bipolar and she's okay now and she's managing and all that stuff. But at the
God.
time when it was all coming out, it was scary and chaotic and it was heartbreaking. My parents didn't know what to do. My mom overengaged. My dad distanced himself. And me, as the youngest child, was like, I'll just go hole myself away and do good in school and I won't be a problem, right?
Yeah.
But
That's so
part of
tough.
me was
Yeah.
struggling with, I don't know how to be helpful. I don't know where my value is. I don't, grown-ups know how to handle this stuff, and I'm just a kid. I don't. And it
Right.
wasn't until later on in life that I was bothered by that so much because I had such a capacity and a potential to want to be helpful and create, a way of making things better for people and talking about that. But it was so unscaffolded for and, it never got built up. And so because I was just kind of gave off that I was a shy and I needed to be taken care of kind of a kid. But I always tell people a child's greatest vulnerability can be their greatest strength later on
Yes.
in life. You just
It's so
can't
cute.
limit it or shut down on the possibility. And so that was for me. That's how it was. I learned that I had an enormous amount of skill to help and to be there for people and to know how to, move them through a process. But it was never an option as a kid. I didn't see it as an option. So another part of my work is helping kids see what they got and that might matter to them more than they ever thought. And when they're thinking of what they want to do in their life, let's make sure that that's being expressed somewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be in their career, but don't
Mhm.
cut it off from you as something that doesn't matter when it really does.
And it's so interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm glad you're, unmasking and being vulnerable. I'll be vulnerable back, but I'm also the youngest of a couple of siblings. I mean, my dad got sick when I was really young. I was about 8 years old. It was pretty significant.
Yeah.
And we went through some hard times. And it's interesting because I feel like I'm in therapy right now, but I, with a counselor. But no, but I went through, I didn't even know it because when you're young, you can't label these things really, right? They're just
Right.
happening and then you reflect and you realize but I also didn't wanna be a bother at all. So, I also was just like, "Okay, I'm gonna do well in school. I'm gonna be obedient. I'm gonna try my best not to cause any problems at all because I know they're dealing with, like, a really important situation." And I also knew that I learned from that because of the instability that this, an illness can cause to a family, especially with young kids, is, "Oh my gosh, I have to pursue something that is gonna be 100% stable and
Right.
make sure that I can take care of my own family. And I didn't realize that I was doing that. And so I took one accounting class because that's what my siblings did, my older siblings, and then I withdrew. And so I found earlier on that yeah, that wasn't going to work. Now I'm a speech pathologist, and I went into a field that I didn't know would be necessarily good for me. Just things fell into place. But to your point, it's almost as if like it's just we're programmed, I guess, from childhood in terms of what we think we're going to be doing
Right.
later on, or what we should be doing.
Right, and it's very difficult to piece all these patterns together that we just fall into from a young age, and again, we can go down the line of, intergenerational inherited trauma, right? Like,
Sure.
our parents' issues were given to them by their parents and so
Oh,
on and so forth,
definitely. Oh,
and we
yes.
have to find where those patterns exist for us at an unconscious level so that we can choose if we wanna break out of them or not, because, there's no wrong choice. If that child who's an artist wants to be an engineer, that's fine, but it's gotta fit who they are. They need to be an engineer that is a representative of how they want to contribute to the world of engineering in a way that matters to them. And so we do still have the opportunity to create meaning wherever we are, but we have to be really clear that we're creating it because it's connected to something of us that really matters. And then we have to face all the systems that maybe invalidate that or, work against that or have given us messages that maybe don't allow us to be free enough to choose what that's going to look like. I know my parents know I'm a therapist, but they don't really know what I do because for them to really understand the depth of what I do, they'd have to look inward on some level, and they don't need to.
Yeah.
I'm not here to change my parents, and nobody
Right.
should. My
Right.
parents
Right.
are lovely, wonderful
Yeah.
people,
I
and
mean,
they
you're
are, yeah.
Madison, Wisconsin, man, so you're good. Yeah, your parents.
No, I'm from, I'm originally from Illinois and Chicago,
Okay.
and then now I'm in the Detroit area,
Oh, okay.
you know,
Midwest. So you know
Midwest,
New
but
York.
yeah,
New
you
York,
got the
anything in the Midwest, it's all the same, no?
anything west of Pennsylvania is cornfields, right?
Yeah. I don't know
No,
why I had Wisconsin on my head. I must have just, like, met
that's
somebody
funny.
from there or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
no, probably have an
But, yeah,
accent somehow.
so even
Yeah,
yeah, that cultural, yeah, dynamic
yeah,
even just in the Midwest is different, but you're saying that, your parents are great, but
yeah.
looking inward is hard.
Well, yeah, and it's just not something. And again, that was a pattern. I was headed in that same direction of just perform, just do what's right, and I'm not going to go too far into my own life, but it's
No.
a relatable human experience, and that's the
Mhm.
thing. I never want people to separate out giftedness or 2E, and to me, it's all
Yeah.
the same, to be honest. But
Yeah,
to
yeah.
separate that out as a separate way of living or being, no. Yes, you have to differentiate first. You have to see what makes you different, where you are in the extreme areas or where you struggle. And then it's about integrating back into the world, protecting the vulnerabilities, knowing where your value is, knowing what matters to you, learning how to listen and connect, and then go wherever you want. There is no there's no limit, it's how you want to create that meaning.
Yeah, and speaking of creating that meaning, you went on a journey through video games. You became a video game professional. Can you speak more to that in terms of how you were following a specific dream and you were gifted and talented, or you say you're not sure if you were, but you likely were, right?
Pretty sure I am.
Yeah, you were, yeah, and
Yeah,
so so
yeah,
it manifested in a way in video games where you were really amazing at it, right? And
yeah.
so you held on to that for a long time, and so you just got better and better at it. So like, can you speak more to how you just became so good at it, and what really just kind of jolted you out of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a matter. Yes, I was very good at games. I grew up playing with my cousins. They were my best friends. I mean, it was every day. I mean, we just like we wanted to conquer everything and anything. And yeah, I got very, very good at playing them. And I probably slipped too far into something that I tell clients to avoid, which is I became my identity. Identities are we have multiple identities. We all have
Right,
different identities, right? And each of them should be a fit and express something about who we really are as just us, our personhood. But when you become your identity, I mean, I was like video game everything. Everybody knew me as the video game guy, and I was going to work in it. I was going to surround myself in it. It was like who I was. That's how I was going to belong and fit in.
right,
That's a dangerous thing because what happens when it goes away? What happens when it doesn't meet the expectations you had in your head? What happens when you can crumble? You fall down and you fall down hard. And so a lot of these gifted kids or 2E kids or kids that struggle create an identity around their smartness and ability and doing well in school and other things. And then they face a challenge where that's no longer there for them in the way they thought it was. And so it's this a disintegration, so to speak. And you have to reintegrate and realize you are more than just smart. You are a gifted person, which is asynchronous development. It is, you are all of these things. You struggle at things that are simple for others. And that identity journey was how I related to video games. And you know, I was relying on them to serve a purpose for me. It was like, this is how I'll show that I have mastery over something. I'll just be really, really good at this. But that only goes so far. And again, you lose interest and it's not what you really want to do anymore. And you have to kind of reshuffle your life and figure out what really matters. I still play. I still enjoy it. I can still talk about it with the kids that come in the office, which is a
Which is
lot of fun.
fantastic. That's a
Yeah.
fantastic way to connect because,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still learning. I still, after all these years with the teens and tweens, I still don't understand what they're talking about half the time.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it's probably ignorance is bliss, to be honest.
Yeah.
Might not want to go down that road. And, again, it's not about being authentic, but it is about learning, you have a passion here and what does it do for you and what do you like about it?
Mhm.
And for me, again, it was, I liked being really good at something, but I was
Mm.
also avoidant of learning how to be really good at other things in my life because I would hit my natural abilities limit and didn't want to go into facing that I kind of suck at stuff or that I'm mediocre because I always had a vision of what it should look like, but I didn't have the skill to get that vision into reality, or I didn't have the help I needed, or the support, or the mentoring. Luckily, when I found Andy Mahoney, he knew this stuff backwards and forwards. And so he could kind of blast through my defenses that I would put up around getting better at something and talk to really what I needed to deal with in my life. And he always saw that I had a lot to give. He always saw that I had potential in there, but it needed to be activated, not reached, activated through creating identities that were really a fit for who I was.
Wow. That is so insightful and so poignant because you're right. I mean, not just for gifted and talented, but especially for gifted and talented, the big thing is the intelligence, right? That is your identity. I know that I'm intelligent, right? But then what are you beyond that, right? You're a
Right.
curious person, you're a passionate person, maybe
Yeah.
you're adventurous, maybe you travel, maybe there are other things maybe that you should dabble in, but you're right, you get so fixed in a certain zone. And I won't really blame the individual themselves completely because I
No.
feel like everybody around them is also putting them in the zone. Like, oh, you're the video game player.
Hmm.
Even people around you that are supportive of you. Oh, you're the amazing, piano player. You're the amazing soccer player. And I feel like it's very often like you're pigeonholed in a
Yep.
sense. And so
Yeah.
I find like it seems like it's not necessarily good for that to become your identity, right? Your identity should be much more than that. But the order it sounds like to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to prevent that or anything from becoming your identity truly is to still engage in something that you really like video games, but also engage in things that maybe you might have a risk of failing at.
Yeah, exactly that. And it gets complicated. But again, it's
Yeah.
all humanity. Boiled down to it, every person listening should have a way to relate to exactly what we're talking about today.
Yes, this is humanity.
The
Yeah.
only difference in gifted land is it's just more extreme, more
Mhm.
pronounced, more emotional, bigger a little bit. And that's fine. That's okay. But it's still rooted in the same thing of how we create connection in life, create meaning, build up these things. But yes, understanding that the way we perceive the world and the way our brains operate might be different enough that we should take a look at that. Because again, I have
Yeah.
a lot of kids who are brilliant, but their processing speed is so slow and it takes them
Yeah.
so long to really digest something and make sense of it that they feel stupid. Being in a classroom where everybody else shoots their hand up because they have the answer quicker than you, and even if you had your time, you would know it, but because you're not doing it fast enough, there's a belief that you're not smart, and that is not the truth.
Thing. It's a lot of all or nothing, black and
Yeah.
white thinking, which is also part of humanity. So many of us, right?
Yep.
But again, that fear of failure, that fear of risk taking. And then, unfortunately, what I've observed also is that if one does fail in this category, for lack of a better way of saying,
Yeah.
the fears, but then it's almost like they're validating the truth that, yes, they aren't that smart, right?
Right.
It's like, I did fail, I did take this risk, and now because I failed, that's actually confirming their bias that, they're really not that smart.
Right. It's this self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy. But what I like to do with clients that are like that is because they usually just do nothing then. They don't try, they don't do anything. And I go, well, what if I told you you're failing now and you're surviving? You're okay, you're not dead, you're You're still here, but you're already feeling that pain. It's not about
Mhm.
that. It's about something else. And sometimes this is the one that most people miss. Sometimes it's a fear of success. It's a fear that
Ah,
if I actually engage in my life and start to build things, the demand is going to go up. I'm going to have to deal with more. And I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid that I'll build it up high enough that I won't be able to manage it. And then it comes crashing down. And sometimes
right.
that's a fear of how to scaffold and build up and create a sequence so that there's some level of movement. But it is very tricky. And it takes a long time for people to build that awareness and acknowledgement that that's what they're dealing with and what they're up against, and can feel okay enough to maybe try again or move again or have the support they need in the right places to re-engage.
Wow, that's so interesting, though, the fear of failure and the fear of success. I think we all have it on some level because,
Oh, yeah,
again, there's more expectations on you, and especially if you're gifted and talented, the expectations are significantly higher
yep,
when you show success because then there's more put on you naturally from what I've seen. But to close it up, I just want to ask you one final thing about this practice that you have right now. Andy Mahoney was the one that really was the one that helped you with this. So can you tell us a little bit about what happens at the Center for Identity Potential?
for sure. And so, we work, yes, specifically, we have expertise in the gifted and the neurodivergent, asynchronous kids. We really see everybody. We're trained mental health counselors across the board. So a lot of people ask, like, do I have to be gifted to come see you? Not necessarily. If it's a good fit, if it's what you're looking for, we're here to help. And we are a group practice. We work together as a team on everything. Nobody here works in isolation because we practice what we preach. We don't want people trying to solve their own problems in isolation, and we don't work that way either.
Of course.
And,
No
we're very
silo.
no, it doesn't work. I'd quit. Honest to God, if it was just me here, I'm very good at this job, but I would quit. It'd be
Right.
too
No,
much.
because
If
it
I
feels
can't
like
go to
that's
my people and be like, I'm losing my mind on this one.
right. But it seems like that's what mental health has become, unfortunately.
How
Like
about
almost
it?
siloing, and it's
Right?
so not effective. Yeah. I mean, it's effective for certain people, but I've just seen, yeah. So thank you for being one of the a few left that
Yeah,
are now
that
working.
are
Yeah. Yeah.
prioritizing it. Right.
Yeah.
And you can find us at, centerforidentitypotential.com. We
Hmm.
have a lot of resources on there, videos, even about some of the processing things that I like to talk about and teach people about. Um, and, we work telehealth. We work with people all over the country. That comes with the cost that we don't do insurance, but, we try to make everything work for the people that need it. And, there's always a way if there's a will. And then, yeah, you can find my podcast Hopelessly Gifted at hopelessly gifted.com. I'm trying to beg people for user questions now. I want more and more people to give me real questions that they're struggling with so I can answer them on the air. And then you can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well.
Thank you so much. I learned so much about Twice Exceptional or Gifted and Talented, the same thing in my mind.
There you go. Yeah. Now, see,
It,
you did learn. Yes,
yeah,
100%.
I did learn, see, because yeah, they're synonymous now.
Yeah.
No, but I learned so much just in terms of the way the brains are working because I think that again, there's so much mystery and there's so many layers that are a little bit complex with this population. So thank you so much for sharing the wealth of knowledge and just even like counseling tips, even though I'm not a counselor, but can help me when I'm working with them.
Oh,
And for all those who are listening, I think you really demystified something that's really still a
I,
mystery.
I hope so. This was an absolute pleasure, and I'm really
Oh,
appreciative of you taking the time because this was great. I really appreciate it.
yeah, I can't wait to stay in touch.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.